Okay, I think we're now live. My name is Tim Erickson. We're here for the bi-weekly backdrop CMS design and UX meeting. And today, well, let's go ahead and do our introductions. And then we have a couple of topics. We're starting late, might be a short meeting today, but we'll see how it goes. Again, I'm Tim Erickson. I'm in Deerwood, Minnesota. And I've been telling everybody about what glorious weather and fall colors we're experiencing right now. I'll leave it at that. Jen, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Jen Lampton, joining from Oakland, California.
Okay, let's do Joseph, and then Nate can wrap us up.
I am Joseph. I'm a developer from Las Vegas, Nevada, and a working committer.
Okay, and Nate?
Yeah, and I'm Nate Lampton, Quick Sketch technical lead. I don't usually attend this meeting, so it's kind of fun.
Okay. Yeah, these meetings, for some reason, they're at the same time they've always been, but being after the dev meeting seems to have diminished our attendance a little bit. It might just be because for other reasons, sort of accidental, but we can get that going again. Anyways, we got a good number of people today. I am going to really quickly, we talked through one issue before the meeting, and I'd like to state it, quickly summarize it in the meeting. Andy, you'll be interested in this one. The issue is a method of allowing us to create updates to bases that are backward compatible that might also help us with some other things we'll talk about in a second. And we've been talking about, we've had a number of different ideas out there, including things like supplemental style sheets or supplemental CSS selectors as options that would help us do this. I think we've settled on the supplemental selectors. So the idea would be that maybe once a year, we would add a CSS selector to the body class for new sites, and then old sites would have the option of adding that manually, but new sites would get it automatically. So we could write new rules that fix things in basis that would only affect those new sites that have the supplemental CSS selector. Is that an accurate and short description of okay? We would add a CSS selector to the body. Oh, I'm hearing some lag there. That was my voice. Anyways, Andy, we did partially talk about this because we need to do this regardless of that, but this might also allow us to do some things to basis that would certainly freshen it up on new sites and be backwards compatible. But I'm totally open to right now, let's just focus on getting the CSS supplemental selectors working. And then in the meantime, we could be thinking about if there are some things that we might also want to do to freshen up bases using CSS selectors. But I don't think there's consensus on that yet. So I don't want to, promise that. Any questions? We've sort of talked that all through. I guess if somebody wants to add something to the discussion now, they can, but we do also want to move on to at least one or two other issues. Anyone?
Did you ask me a question just now, Tim? I was just...
Okay. Well, I'm not sure if you heard my little thing. I did ask you if you had sort of any questions about this supplemental CSS selectors, but if you didn't...
No, I was sorry. I was just signing it. I was a little bit distracted.
Okay.
No, I haven't really thought about how it could be done. My idea was just to have something new for the anniversary, but I haven't thought of the details how it could be done.
Okay. Well, I'll just repeat. I think the summary is that we've kind of decided on a plan which would make those changes at least possible. We haven't decided yet that they're desirable or realistic, but if we work on the supplemental CSS styles selectors, I think at least opens up an avenue where we might make a few other changes. And we'll talk more about that, I think, later. Okay?
Okay.
If nobody has anything else to add, then I think Joseph had another issue he wanted to talk about.
Sorry, I had put a chip in my mouth right as you said that.
Okay.
So this is not specifically a core issue. Tim and I have been working on some stuff related to recipes for a while, and I essentially had this idea of creating what we've been referring to as micro themes. basically like a very compartmentalized, like you're styling just one element on a page type things, and you can have as many of them installed as you want. And you can pick like different ones, like I want this button theme on one side or that button theme on another side or whatever. But something that I have not been able to figure out yet is how I would implement styles for these things. My idea at the moment for the CSS and JavaScript and the settings is that it would just be in like a CSS and a JavaScript file. But yeah, I don't know how I would dynamically load in templates from multiple locations like that. And I was wondering if anybody had any ideas.
Well, so templates are the problem, right, Joseph? You and I have talked about a possible solution for how to do the style sheets.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, I think the CSS is actually the easy part.
Right. So the question then is, how could you? So I think the trick is like if a recipe or a micro theme were a module, modules can add templates, right?
Mhm.
But the problem, what we've been trying to come up with is a way that we could add CSS without having it to be dependent on the recipe itself. So, and we have some ideas about that. So you could, our rough idea is that you could install a recipe. The recipe could put a CSS style sheet specific for that recipe into the files directory. And then we could have another, like the recipe module could manage those style sheets and let you turn them on or off and add them to the core theme. So, and then you could disable the recipe and you'd still have the CSS. And, we haven't made this work yet. Whether or not it's a great idea, I don't know. But I think what we've realized is that these micro themes might also need template files. And I don't think we can do that same thing with template files. So is there a way that that a micro theme could or a recipe could modify a template and be disabled afterwards? If we just left it enabled, it could just include the template override in the module. But is that the right question, Joseph?
Basically, yeah. It's like how do we add new templates without requiring a module or a theme to be actually enabled?
Jen, Nate, or Andy, do you? I don't have any ideas. Do any of you?
I do not.
Okay.
I might not have followed how the templates or CSS file, like where they go.
So with the CSS, we can just take them and store them like in the files directory, the same way the color module does.
Okay. Yeah, but
And same
template
with JavaScript.
files. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, other than if you started doing, contemplate type stuff where it's like, the templates are actually not files at all. They're somewhere else, which you
Right.
can, I imagine you can theoretically still do somehow, and I can't even remember how that module worked to inject or override its templates. Probably
could-
through some kind of crazy pre-processing.
There isn't any way to put a template file into the files directory, is there, and then access it and use it?
I mean, in the same way that Contemplate could pull from the database and make that be your template file, you could do the same thing, I imagine, that you can pull from a different location, including the files directory, and have that render. So it's not supported by core, but it's probably possible.
That makes sense to you, Joseph?
Like using a hook theme registry alter.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it works. You could just look at Contemplate module for 777 and see, because it would allow you to edit your node template, for example, in a text area, and then it would save into the database. So basically, it was database provided templates. Now, I guess now that I'm saying it, it was only overriding templates, not creating new ones. And so
Okay.
perhaps there's another, step there that might make
Okay.
it not possible to make a
Hmm.
new template that didn't exist anywhere else.
Okay.
I'm also not sure any of this is a good idea.
So-
But-
So there's a, I've been trying to like come up with ways where we don't have to have all or nothing themes.
Mhm.
Because that's like if you want to have like a header style from
Mhm.
one theme and a footer style from another theme, you essentially have to create a new theme and copy and paste their code from them. And there's not really any like good way to do that. And I think it would be, I don't know if how much people would actually use this, but I think it would be cool to be able to have multiple themes enabled and pick and choose their features. It's like I've actually been taking some inspiration just today reading about the single directory components in Drupal 11.
I was going to bring that up too.
Although I don't like that name. That's a very programmer name for something.
Yeah,
So-
I personally like them quite a lot. And for background, the concept of a single directory component is a directory that
Mhm.
contains the CSS, the JavaScript, and the template for a part of the page, a component
Right.
from the design system. And you could do something like it might not be quite so large as the header, for example, but you could have a single directory component for trying to think of a good example, like a card. And then all of the CSS, JavaScript, and template is all together instead of being located in separate directories. And it does have the benefit, like Joseph was asking about, of kind of containing all of the stuff for that one component in one location. It doesn't enable you to pull components from different themes. Like, I mean, maybe you could set up a framework for that, but it does make it a lot easier to copy a component between two different projects because it's just in that one location.
A practical example that might help sort of envision this is, I think, like a 3-column, a 3-block footer. Right now, Backdrop out of the box just has a single region, right? So you can't put sort of you can't create in basis 3 blocks next to each other. There are some other themes may do that, but a lot of themes don't. But that might be just something you want to do. And if we had something that just like you could add to any theme that would just say it would reorganize the footer to have 3 different columns and maybe give you a little bit of styling, that could be useful. Now you could create a module that does that. Right. So
Or
it
use
isn't
or
that we
use
need
mini
something
layouts.
new. But I think Joseph's idea is that maybe we should like recipes. I keep trying to find a way to distinguish what are how are recipes different from regular modules. And the one way is that you can install them and then disable them. And I think what he's looking for is a way to sort of distinguish these micro themes from modules, and that maybe you don't need to keep the module there and inactive. You could just install it or we could just have micro theme modules, and then that solves the problem. Right? There's nothing that would prevent us from doing a micro theme as a module, is there, Joseph?
I don't think so.
No,
I was hoping to just have one module that would manage all of them and just put them all in a directory somewhere.
right. So like I think the dream for recipes is that there would be a recipe UI, either a contrib module or someday in core, where you could say, show me all the recipes that are available. You click a button, they're installed, and they're not added sort of as ongoing modules. And I think Joseph's basically saying, I'd like the same thing, but for micro themes. And it could be, fundamentally, I think micro themes and recipes are kind of the same in a way, but it might be sort of a subsection of like recipes.
Yep. Yeah, it's funny, the end thing is that pretty much every thing that we want to do can be done with modules.
Right.
And the only thing we don't want is the module itself, right? Where it's like all of the functionality we're describing can all be done with modules. And like,
I think what Tim and I are trending towards in these discussions is all of these different components as atomized pieces, and then the recipe is just a list of these components.
mhm. Yeah, I see what you guys are
Well,
getting
yeah,
at.
I've actually been sort of, and I probably talked to you about this, Nate. I created this digital agency recipe package, and the idea was the package is like a new level, which I'm not, I don't like that name. It's just my working title. But the idea is that the micro themes and the recipes are all components, and that a package pulls together a bunch of them for a specific use case. Like it says, this I want the FAQ recipe, I want the footer micro theme, I want the services, and it bundles a bunch of those together. Maybe does some extra things, and it could be that these packages remain modules. That they themselves are modules that have to stay enabled, but all the individual components would be something different. And so that's, that's what we're talking about in terms of recipes and micro themes.
Yeah.
Anyways, we've, with the digital agency thing I've been doing, I feel like I've come a long way. I had hoped in the dev meeting to talk about, there's one or two core issues that I've now run into that I would consider bugs. Well, one of them is definitely a bug. One of them is kind of I don't know if you've had a chance to look at this issue, Nate, but it might be a new feature. Right now, if I in recipes, I'm doing I create a recipe and then I create a submodule that is sample content for the recipe. Okay. And in order for them to load properly, I have to make the parent recipe a dependency of the sample content recipe. If I don't, they don't load in order. And it tries to create the content. It may try to create the content before the content type is created.
Mhm.
Well, if I make the parent module a dependency of the submodule, it works. I can do that, but Backdrop throws up an error saying that it couldn't find, and I forget which one. I think it says like it couldn't find this dependency, and I have an issue open for it. Actually, I could tell you what it is quick because I have it open here on my desk. It is issue number 6607. Backdrop basically throws a warning that says could not fetch releases for project services sample content. And I think I forget. There's been a whole discussion. Greg actually created a PR for this, but the PR didn't work. It didn't solve the problem. But he had at least a hunch of why this is happening. But right now, my digital agency recipe package, I have a screenshot there, throws up these warnings, which really end up being irrelevant because it actually does all the things I want it to do. It just gives these scary warnings that I don't think are needed. So.
Yeah, and to clarify, this is not a problem when the modules are already downloaded and on the modules page. This is the project installer, the project browser that
Yeah, that's probably true.
demonstrates this problem.
It essentially, the submodule is listed before the parent module,
Mhm.
and so it tries to fetch releases for the submodule.
Yeah. A good question. Like if we could just not show that information.
Yeah, that it turns out that's not really a problem, I think, unless there's some unintended consequence that I haven't run into yet. But there's been a number of things like this that I've been running into that would just make the recipes work, the recipes as I've been developing them work better. So. Anyways.
Yeah, this is a project browser specific problem. I'm not quite sure what the correct fix is here yet.
Okay,
I mean,
well,
we could potentially just suppress it, like you say, but and honestly, 90% of the time, it would probably be just fine. Oh, you know what we could do, maybe.
mhm,
Oh, well, I bet we could solve this. Because what we could do, I think what's happening here is that
Mhm.
as soon as Project Browser, like it looks at the list of dependencies and it's like,
Mhm.
oh, I gotta find modules A, B, and C, but it might not know that modules B and C are part of module A.
Right. Yes.
And it's probably just as it encounters misses, it's saying, oh, I should add a message for that, add a message for that.
Mhm.
And what we should do instead is try to download projects A, B, and C. We only succeed in downloading A because it's the only one that's a real project. And then we should check the dependencies and see if the modules magically appeared,
Right.
in the process of downloading module A, are B and C now there? So we can probably fix this without any changes other than to project browser.
Okay, well, I've assumed it hopefully isn't too hard to fix, and it's not actually blocking me. It just feels like it could be a deterrent to people who are installing this to see those warnings, and they might get confused and back off or something. Um, but yeah. Um, okay, well, I don't think we answered Joseph's question, but we've at least furthered that discussion. There definitely will be a talk about all of this recipe stuff at Backdrop Live. We've the rate of arrival of recipes is accelerating, and we need to sort out some of these internal questions that have been theoretical up until now. They're becoming practical, like what exactly are recipes and how do we want to handle them?
Well, Nate's comment about the contemplate module might solve that issue.
Okay.
I'll just see what they do.
So, and again, I'm sure some people aren't going to love this solution, but one of the things I've been to keep again, it's a fairly arbitrary decision, but to keep the idea that recipes can installed and then disabled, one of the big blockers has been that some recipes need some CSS. And how do we solve that? And I proposed earlier one solution to that. Another one that comes up from time to time is what about using CSS injector? My recipes do require other modules, contrib modules, so we could require CSS injector and create rules. I've been uncertain that would actually work. Well, we actually did. I haven't told Joseph this yet. The most recent recipe, slideshow recipe, does use CSS injector, and it seems to work. Although it did work, and then the latest release is actually having a little glitch with a permissions problem with a temporary directory that I think we can solve. I don't think it's a bug. I think
Okay.
we just need to fix it in the recipe. But anyways, we do have CSS injector working, but making CSS injector the solution to this problem means that you have to actually write code to configure, because I think the rules for CSS injector are stored in the database. So you actually have to write you use the install profile for the recipe to add the rules into the database for CSS injector.
Right.
So there are other things that my recipes do now that also require code, but ideally we'd like recipes to get to the point where you can create a recipe without writing code, without writing PHP. And my other solution would do that, would let you add CSS just through adding a CSS file. You wouldn't have to write any code. But a little bit of the urgency has that been taken away, that I've now figured out a way to use CSS injector as a way to add CSS to a recipe and then still disable the recipe and have the CSS stick.
The CSS injector use config files, and that's why that works.
There's
No, go ahead. You know more.
there is an issue to use config files, but currently it stores everything in the database.
Right.
Ah.
And that's why it's awkward. If it did use config files, that would be better. And so that, we could maybe make an improvement to CSS injector that would reduce the need for this other idea that I proposed. Because I would like to be able to just upload either config files or CSS style sheets and have them sort of thrown into either the files directory or the config directory and have them be available and work. But right now that's not so easy. So. Okay.
Yeah, that wouldn't be awful. Now I've got all kinds of bad ideas about about like, well, if we can store CSS in config files, and now we're talking about contemplate module, what about storing templates in config files, right?
I mean, it's just a string.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very terrifying idea. But can like
it's a config thing. We're not proposing it for core.
Yeah, well, it would if you had a module that did such a thing, it would, and now this permission's already marked as dangerous, but because templates are PHP, if you had access to the config UI, you would have the ability to execute arbitrary PHP because you could import a config file that contained PHP and then visit it. So giant security flags everywhere. But if you're making a user interface for editing templates, clearly the config dashboard is obviously extraordinarily dangerous to your site as well, because you could do all kinds of things with config. So I'm not sure it's a new level of concern. It's just a side effect. But yeah, if you make such a module, Joseph, contemplate basically for config, then recipes, terrifyingly, for better or worse, could use config in combination with that module and CSS injectors, a CSS injector to make both templates and CSS files all through config. And I think still that's the direction that we're kind of heading, is that we want recipes to be config. And having trib modules that enable more things to be config would be an interesting way to achieve that.
Yeah, my plan was to store the templates and CSS files just directly in the file system. And then essentially use the config file as a reference to the other files. But yeah, I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess you could still do that by like uploading a file and then creating a config file that points at it.
Yeah, but a recipe, like how would a recipe initialize that? I think that's my question. And because the recipe right now is a module, it can do things in PHP, but if it only had config to work from, like this theoretical recipe as a set of dependencies and config, it wouldn't have the opportunity to do that unless recipes also had some other specific support for something other than config and dependencies.
So my plan was that the manager module would you'd put these in a folder in your recipe, like you'd have a /whatever my recipe /micro themes, and then the manager module would just suck them all in and store them somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay.
Which, yeah, I don't know if that precludes it being a more widely or generically supported concept, like or if this is yet another, like a recipe could still do this just by a recipe would be a set of config and dependencies, but maybe if it depended upon this contrib module, the contrib module could pull additional stuff from the recipe at the time that it was imported.
Right.
Yeah. So maybe that would work as well.
Yeah, essentially, I think the plan is to like have all the definitions for things in the recipe, but have all the functionality that actually makes them work in the manager module.
Yeah, but we could still theoretically have recipes that don't have that dependency, you know,
Yes.
that are simpler, that are just config based recipes.
Right.
And or potentially, I mean, this kind of inconsistency could result in some what's the right word? Differences in approach.
Right.
Where it's like some recipes might depend on CSS injector, and some of them might depend on, you know, contemplate or, you know, asset manager or something like that, you know. But maybe that's fine. Like that would be a valuable thing to have the choices of different ways of you know,
Right.
the different dependencies, because that's kind of the whole point of a recipe. It's like there's lots of ways to build an image gallery, and you know, you get option A, B, and C, and they all use different approaches.
Mhm. You're muted, Tim.
Another issue that I just ran into, so the recipe we just released this week is we called slideshow recipe, and my colleague actually named it, and I'm a little bit unhappy with the name because there could be multiple people might create multiple slideshow recipes, and this like at first I was thinking this is kind of specifically designed to be a hero slideshow, so maybe it should have been hero slideshow recipe. But then it occurred to me as I was talking about it that maybe more important than that is this recipe uses Flux Slider, whereas another recipe might use a different module. So maybe the best practice would be to include the module name in the name, so that so it would be, you know, Flux Slider slideshow recipe. That way, if somebody were looking for the Flux Slider module, they might also run into the recipe and say, oh, I could just use this recipe, which would then include the module, and it would include the sample content and everything, and configure it for me. So like, I don't know, I'm again, we don't need to make rules about this, but it would be good to at least come up with some guidelines. Like so this module just got released a couple of days ago. I assume that it would still be okay if I like renamed it and freed up the original namespace. So I changed it to Flux Slider slideshow recipe. That's my intent right now, is to go ahead and do that.
I agree. I think that's a great idea. And if you
Okay.
decide to change the library in the future, then you should just make another recipe module that
Right. Well,
uses the different library.
Well, we
Yeah.
don't. The recipe doesn't use the library, right? It uses the module.
The module.
Yes,
Yeah.
and we could, in theory, the recipe could switch and use a different module, but I think it would be better to just create a new recipe that uses a different module. Yeah. Okay. We're pretty close to the scheduled end time, and I have guests. And does anybody else have anything else they want to bring up?
No.
Okay. Well, I appreciate all the discussion about recipes, because we've been Joseph and I are talking about these almost every week during office hours, and you know, I've been making progress on building some, and so there's been there has been a real spurt in activity around recipes over the last 3 or 4 months. Okay, we'll talk to people later. I'm
Okay.
gonna head out. I'm gonna stop oh no, you're gonna stop the recording.
Yep. All right.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.